I knew I had to record a podcast. Art was the key. Only by referencing our thoughts and inserting a mid-roll advert at 20-minute mark could we escape the dark place.
Adam Strawn, welcome to the Alan Wake 2 spoiler cast. I'm Scott Tilford. How are you doing?
I'm really, really good, Scott, and I am super excited to be out of that dark place. Now, I don't know what took over me there.
See, we should say that because this is a full-on Alan Wake spoiler cast, we're going to be doing full spoilers for even the end of the game, theories, etc. We'll talk a little bit about Alan Wake 3 and where things are left at the end of that game because who even knows if he's still in the dark place at the very end. I wanted to open on general thoughts, and then we've got some specific stuff to get to. But give me your thoughts after finishing the game.
Like after I finished the game, there was a little bit of like WTF is going on, but I love the ambiguity of it all because that's what we've kind of been treated to all the way through this. So, you know, it does give a lot of like narrative thread points where you think, okay, this is going to build up, this is going to get explained, we're going to get a definitive answer here. But I kind of love that we don't. And I know that it's obviously leading because we've had the 2 confirmations of DLC coming out. We also have that TV show as well.
Yes.
So I'm really intrigued, and especially we have is at the lake house, which is a part of the map that you obviously can't get to in the main game, which is obviously going to be the DLC section. So I'm really intrigued to see how they built that, because the way the game ends, and the way it ends where, like, you know, Saga's on the phone trying to ring her daughter to find out has Alan actually saved her daughter. And then obviously Alan gets shot in the head, like, and then suddenly springs back up, and, you know, is Scratch really gone? There's all of these questions that are still there, but I really love it. For me, it's built up to something which makes sense for the characters. It's like the answers that they wanted to get along with us as well, but it's not definitive. It's leaving us at a nice cliffhanger, not an irritating one, but a nice way where we go, okay, I've enjoyed a lot of this. I've gotten a lot out of this. Yes, there's still some questions at the end, but it's not like, oh my God, it's ruined because I don't know the answer to this. It's just nice when the DLC comes along and we'll be able to figure those things out.
That's one of the biggest thing for me, and I self-analyzed a lot as I was playing through this, where I was like, they use like intentional ambiguity a lot, and Control had this a lot as well. And I think it's interesting in regards to like Remedy as a dev, where like, you know, they got put on the map by Max Payne. It's a very straightforward game. Like, it had a lot of like, there were supernatural elements in Max Payne, but it was very much, you know, like this person's on drugs, this person's taking the Valkyrie stuff, all the Flesh of Fallen Angel stuff, or whatever it was. There was no, you know, attempt to be like, that's real. And then as you know, Alan Wake sort of played out, and obviously very interpretational ending. It's not a lake, it's an ocean. That was a whole thing. And then they sort of like took a while, did Quantum Break. That was all about time being frozen at the end of time and what's going to happen then. And then Control, like, I loved the way Control played, but I was so lost off towards the end of it, where like they just sort of bring in terminologies, and you have characters who are just monologuing and talking in first person. I knew I had to do this, and then I like, well, how did you know this? Like, what are you talking about? Like, oh, this weird god called Polaris is possessing you and whatever else. And I started to get a bit lost off by the end of Control. And I know that in the DLC they like gave you some answers, and obviously they bring Alan Wake back in the second Control DLC. But I feel like it's that latter Remedy tone that they've doubled the F down on in Alan Wake 2. And even in like on the Reddit threads, on social media and stuff, there's a general sort of conversation around Alan Wake 2 that it is very intentionally confusing. And so for me, I was like self-analyzing as I played through it, being like, okay, it's very Lynchian. It's not giving you the specific grounding for stuff. But then when they bring the FBC in and they go like, you know, like, no, there are actual rules to this, and it's like it's a geographical area that's being, you know, taken hold of by the Dark Place. Yeah. And in theory, Saga's daughter is still alive outside of that space because she's on the phone to her at the very beginning of the game. I'm trying to hold all of this in my head as I'm playing through, and so like the more they keep going, like, no, like, you know, we'll talk about overlaps in the Dark Place and Mr. Scratch, and it's not a loop, it's not a loop, it's a spiral. And I'm like, oh my God, like, I can't hold all of this. And I know that's intentional, but I definitely struggle with that as an overall positive, because Sam Lake and the team are like going for a certain level of ambiguity, but then giving you some facts and being like, no, the FBC understands this. There's a containment thing that we're using for Scratch. Like, I go back and forward on like, when it finished and it rolled credits, I was like, okay. Like, I guess satisfaction will probably come down the line, I guess.
I think one of the big things for this is multi-layered. So, like, there's so much layering to this where it's just it's not one direct narrative where you're like, okay, from start to finish, I know this is the one path, this is the one thing, we're done. Like, there's so many layers to this. And I think one of the big things as well is that you're always questioning all the way through this, what is real and what is not real. And that's that's a massive thing in Remedy games in general. I mean, you and I talked about Control before when we had Jessie, who I'm still devastated didn't show up in this game.
I thought she was going to come towards the end.
Towards the end, if she showed up, I would have literally levitated myself. I would have gotten her powers and just levitated.
Like Jessie.
Yeah, literally. But even that, she doesn't even react in that game. She's just okay, just rolling with the punches. And I think that's kind of the best way sometimes to go with some of this, where you're like, okay, let's now this is happening. Now this is happening. Let's roll with the punches. And I think Remedy are really good. They obviously have a wider story, a big universe that's all mapped out, and they have this, and they're kind of slowly as the game goes on, it suddenly becomes unloaded onto us, especially at the back end of Alan Wake when it's suddenly all of this is going on. We've got the Norse mythology stuff going on as well, and then there's all of this going on in the background, but you can get as much or as little out of that as you really want.
Yeah.
You can go in and just play it as a straightforward survival horror, ignore all of that, and still have a great time. And that's one of the things that I love about this game, is that it's so accessible for people, many different stretches of what you want to get out of this game. And for me, I just love the weirdness. I love the David Lynchian. You and I are Lost fans. Obviously the first Alan Wake, even Sam Lake said, we referenced Lost with the black smoke going through the forest. We reference that in the game as well. I love that element of mystery. And of course, he's writing a novel. This is what you get in story writing. It's so multi-layered. There's things going on all over. Now we've got this TV show coming as well, which would be really interesting how they handle narrative without gameplay to really further explore this kind of world.
Yeah, plus one of the DLC packs is called Night Springs as well. Yes. And they were play as various characters from within the Alan Wake universe, or however the hell that thing's going to come together. And then the other DLC pack is the Lake House, which, like you said, is we know from the game it's one of the FBC control centers. So I think they'll do a lot of grounding and making sense of what happens in that DLC.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about story stuff and story meaning, because I feel for me it almost gets a bit too convoluted, where it doesn't necessarily have emotional stakes. By the time you get to the end, it's all lore, it's all world building, it's all characters just telling you what's happening next. And things like when Saga finally uses the clicker and she summons Alan, but she summons him back in time.
Yeah.
And then she just states that it's I knew that I summoned him 3 days ago on the beach, and I'm yeah, okay. For me, who's trying to timeline all of this in my mind and keep hold of everything so that it all makes sense. Revelations like that, or things that feel kind of thrown in, did feel thrown in. And then things like the cult, you've got the cult of the tree and the cult of the word. They're everything comes from Alan ultimately. I guess it's ultimately that if you do it through a control lens, the typewriter is an object of power and everything he's ever written is coming true or whatever, but within a certain geographical space. So that seems to be the case based on what Estevez says about everything is within an area. I imagine it in my mind's eye as a bubble. It's a big old bubble around Bright Falls and everything's in there. And once you're in that bubble, you're possessed by things or you think different things, your memories change and everything else. But yeah, story meaning wise, I thought that for the vast majority, it really worked as the torment of the writer, the torment of the creator, not knowing if your work is actually good or not, and then all the insecurities that Alan has manifesting as the version of the dark place that he's in, and then the version of he has a showmanship side to him because he used to be a big star Hollywood writer, which is that phenomenal sequence, the dance sequence.
Oh my God.
They find the best way to recap Alan Wake 1. That's my favorite thing of the year, by far.
It was incredible. Scott and I are doing the dance as we're doing this right now.
Just shaking the hands and go back and forth. But it's stuff like that. I was that bit when that sequence happened, and I mean that's right near the beginning, but it's still a few hours in. I was this is God tier. This is the best thing I've played all year. One of the best things I've ever seen a creative put together. And I love the justification that it's Alan's psyche. It's the part of him that remembers doing talk shows or whatever it is. We can talk about Mr. Door in a bit as well.
Yeah.
But we'll get back to that. But what do you think about the wider story and the thematics and stuff? Because for me, the biggest positives are in those thematics and are in environmental storytelling and general interpretations of the environment and everything. Versus character moments, which other than Saga putting her mind back together at the end, I don't really feel we get many actual character moments.
Yeah, so there's a few things that I'll say here, and there's kind of 3 approaches that I'll really highlight in this. But what I will say first, going into the kind of, that human emotional side of things, I never felt gripped to any of that. So Saga, I know they kind of try to pull our heartstrings a little bit with is her daughter still alive or not? What's happened? Rose tells her at the beginning, oh, your daughter died. I'm surprised you're back here. And because we don't, video games do this quite often, right? Like Fallout for me, Fallout 4 is a big one where it's you've got to care about this child, you've got to care about this. And it's when it's kind of forced upon you like that, for me, it draws more distance because I feel I haven't met this character, I don't know them, so therefore I don't know their relationship. She could be a terrible mother for all I know, so I don't know what they're like. So therefore, when I'm told that I should feel a certain way about somebody, I'm oh,
Like we don't even meet Logan. It's just one phone call
exactly
to start.
that. So yeah, and like obviously Remedy games, for me anyway, like they've never really put that at the forefront of their games. It's been more about like the experience going through things, right? Like Control had literally no emotional kind of depth to it at all, to be honest. And obviously, yeah, like other games as well. I didn't play Quantum Break, I will admit. But yeah, so in terms of that, like it didn't really pull at me in that way. But I think the bigger focus here, there's three things narratively that's going on. We've got kind of the real world, which for me is where kind of the FBC and like obviously Saga and Casey, like outside working for the FBI, that for me is kind of like the real world. That's where we kind of ground ourselves, right? This is what's really happening.
Yes.
This is established. This is them arriving to Bright Falls. You know, we're kind of living this through their characters. We're going into this craziness with them, although we probably as gamers react more than the way Saga did when she's like, oh, I'm going through a tree through the overlap. Okay, let's go. No reaction at all.
That bit when she's like, oh, I needed to get the heart and put the heart in a hole in a sign to trigger the overlap. Yeah. And then later you find out that art is the key, but it makes more sense later because it's poems and songs. I was like, how was putting a heart through a hole in some wood? What was that? Like,
and she was just like, yep, okay, let's go along with that. I know that she's an FBI agent and seen a lot, but I mean, she's not an FBC agent where there's a lot more crazy stuff going on. So that's kind of the real world part of it. And I think that was really well captured. I love the dynamic between Saga and Casey. I think their relationship is really, really well done. So we've got that, but then we've also got the other two worlds, which is the world in which Alan is obviously a writer and he's rewriting things all the time. A lot of the core of his gameplay is literally taking the light and changing scenes. Now, because of that, it means that the narrative structure is really open because things can change. He can introduce things, but then take it away and go down a different path. So it means that that kind of side of the game is forever changing. And then on top of that, we then have Alan in the nightmare world. So this is dream logic, right? So when he's like, you know, in the talk show talking to Mr. Dole, this is a nightmare. So it's nightmare logic. A lot of it doesn't make sense. Whereas like he's obviously written this small little part of New York as well, where he's walking around. We see obviously the shadows saying like, wake.
Yes.
Wake. And like, obviously we'll get into that as well, which I adore. But so we've got three things narratively going on here, and you can attach yourself to one of them. You can really dive into each of them as much as you want. But as long as you kind of go in under the guise and knowing of, right, okay, this is a nightmare world. This is designed to not really make sense. It's just designed more to really kind of pull at Alan and just, you know, really push it at his levels of craziness, I guess, in that point. Narrative structure of Alan, obviously, this kind of leans back into the first game as well, where he is writing the events of what's happening. But in a sense, like Saga says to him, look, she basically says to him, make sure that you write that my daughter's going to be okay. So Alan has that power to change the narrative. But the real world, as I say, is where we ground ourselves in. Like, and I love that the game, after we get the initial start, starts with like Saga and Casey arriving. That's kind of us arriving as well into this madness.
Yeah, I love like the way that the metatextual side of it, the commentaries that they're making on the idea of a story rolling out, and then like you said, making that playable. I like the Alan side of things, like you're finding inspiration, you're not necessarily remembering like scenes that you're then plugging in, but you're thinking about the idea of, oh, what if the cult was in this room? What if the Grandmaster was in this room? And that's the stuff that really messes with you in terms of trying to track everything, because it's like he's coming up with that in like ostensibly real time. But that's him with the typewriter, and you're jumping back and forward. Like his dream space is him sat in that room. Like putting things together, and you cut back to, like you said, the version of him that's exploring in the dark place, and like trying to get out or whatever. I definitely, or part of me, like if I pie charted my mind, there was a sliver of it that was hung up on how was your body underwater for 13 years. Like I know you're in like a different dimension, that you don't eat, you don't like live. Like when people go to the dark place, they just seem to hang out there for 13 years. Like they don't wilt or anything. Like same towards the end when Tor and Odin go down into the water and they're just fine. We didn't see them again, but like they're just fine going back in. And I kind of thought that was a comment on how like the aging artist or the aging creator becomes more aware of the stuff they've made, and they can compartmentalize it in a way, and they're not living for their output in a way that younger artists are, where they get consumed by it. Like Tor and Odin in the game, masterfully
icons.
But like in terms of the songs, like the Poets of the Fall stuff, like one of my favorite bands. I love that they're getting more exposure, but they, as like creatives, as these aging rockers, have had their time in the spotlight, and they're happy for that to sort of be in the past. Like they still have the spirit of it, they still want to rock out and everything. But I kind of wondered about that little comment on like the aging creator. Like assumedly at some point Alan would be like that, would accept. Like that's the whole, to me, that's the whole meaning of the "it's not a loop, it's a spiral" thing. That you're not living for the work, you're living for yourself, and once you realize that, you can ascend back out of it again. And like the Alan's biggest issue is that he's never realized the disconnect, that he doesn't need to live for Hollywood or turning books around or whatever it is. He needs to live for himself. And I think you realize that if you live a life of constant output, like if you're turning things over in terms of for exposure, then you're not living for yourself. Like I think that's a specific split. that it very at the very end it started to go into. And my wife was thinking that maybe Alan Wake 3 would be the more positive game because we haven't talked about Alice yet, but there's the whole role of Alice sort of rounding him out and teaching him the same way that Saga does. Sort of realizing that once you prioritize yourself, you can break out of the dark place. Like Saga does it immediately because either through FBI training or whatever, or being a seer, she's able to separate those things out. So I think those wider thematics are cool. We should quickly talk about Saga's powers. What do you think of all the hunches and the seer stuff and her, I guess, agency across the whole thing?
I love how it evolves. So when it first starts, obviously we kind of, she's an FBI agent. You think, okay, she's obviously got training to assess, go into her investigation. She's got hunches in terms of, okay, this might link to this. But obviously some of them, as you and I have said before, Scott, are very much that seems like you got that from nothing. You picked up a page and you worked all of this out. But I love that, when we go into this, obviously time plays a really interesting part of this whole game, right? Where you said when she activates the clicker, Alan is activated in a different time, when he comes obviously out of there. Now, time has always been a thing, right? Alan can manipulate time in a way by rewriting scenes, by changing things, changing the order of things, everything like that. So it's not a stretch for me to believe that someone like Saga, who has this ability to be a seer, which obviously they lean into with obviously Thor and Odin as well, with the Norse mythology, and obviously Saga, the name itself is Norse. But I love that they brought this in because it was kind of leaning into that explanation of, this is why she feels more connected to this. This is why she has more of an understanding. And I guess in many ways isn't freaking the hell out because she's she is starting to see things. Now, we could obviously raise a lot of questions about the limits of her powers. Well, if she can see things here, then why can't she see the actual fate of her daughter? Why is she questioning that?
Right.
So there's a lot of questions what is the extent of her power? What can she see? What can't she see? And how does she allow herself to see things? Is she just hit by premonitions? We don't really know, and that's part of the mystery of that. But just as a thing to come in and kind of explain, this is why she's able to see things and connect things together in her mind, and obviously her mind place as well, which the gameplay for that is interesting. But for me, it wasn't out of place. It didn't feel like something that was just thrown in just to explain something. It fits within the wider context of the way that they explore time within these games. And I really love that they did that again, but just explored it in a different way with this character.
Yeah, I'm not as positive on it as you. I was definitely because when you begin the game, she has the FBI jacket on, you're exploring stuff with Casey. I was that was channeling True Detective in a visually quite in a specific way. So I was looking forward to getting stuck into the case. And so when you start profiling and then her and then they are hunches, but obviously she's right kind of thing. And then over time you find they just say that she's a seer, she knows things, she can speak to the truth of someone, and that's what the profiling is. And I just in the moment, especially towards the beginning, I was just well, I'm not solving anything. I'm just sort of clicking on a face, and then she says something I knew that I needed to put the heart through the wood to get, and I was well, there's no way you would have deduced that from the body being there. But then even at the beginning, I started thinking, well, I bet she's a creation of Alan, and that's one of the things that happens as the story goes on. One thing to throw in there as well is that I love the hypothesis from the FBC about the idea of whenever a fiction horror writer writes something twisted and messed up and whatever, are they coming up with it themselves, or are they tapping into this weird unknown force that then goes through them and writes the story, which is obviously works for Alan himself. There are a lot of FBC testing sites that you can find in the open world, and a lot of nursery rhymes that you can put together, which I always assumed that would be Saga. I always assumed that would be her as a child or something, and her returning, or maybe it's Logan or whatever. I didn't do that many of those nursery rhymes.
That blows my mind.
You did all of them.
I did, them all, because it's just so bizarre. Again, it's these weird things you get the lunch boxes as well, and then obviously you get the nursery rhymes, and it's again they're so. If you don't do them, obviously you didn't. It doesn't take away from the story. The story doesn't hinge on these things being done, but it's just this little extra thing where you can acquire new things. And as I said to you before, I found Saga to be the easier person to play as compared to Alan. Alan I found a lot more difficult, and the only times I died in the game was when I played as Alan.
His gun sucks. The revolver's terrible.
I mean, 6 shots and then that's it. But as well, it's interesting because, she's a trained agent, so she's used to using firearms, right? So kind of her her gunplay for me plays a lot better anyway. Whereas Alan is a writer and just happens to come. I know he's obviously played the first game, but that's not training. That's him fumbling around, just trying to survive, basically. Although the flare gun is amazing with Alan. But these little nursery rhyme things that you find, obviously, I love the way it's just introduced. And obviously, it's kind of tying back to she's got a young daughter, and we see in her mind place, we see a daughter's bed made up and there's little dolls on the bed, and then she's finding these little dolls. But it's just a nice little way to get extra things. Sometimes they play out good and sometimes they play out bad. So sometimes you'll get like an extra little charm and you think, oh, okay, that's great. And by the end, I think with Saga, I had 3 of the charms where if you die, they immediately break and like keep you alive.
There's a coffee one you can get.
Yeah, yes. I think I had like a deer one, a one that give you like an extra little segment of your torch. And then I think that was like with the deluxe edition, which is
right. Because I had like a stagger one, so it staggers enemies more frequently.
Yes. But so sometimes you would obviously get them. Sometimes you just get like a box with extra ammo. But then sometimes it would just lead to where you'd have like a fight with Taken or wolves, and those bloody wolves.
F the wolves.
Oh my god.
Suck.
Oh, every time I heard a wolf, I was like, well, this is me. I am out.
Guess I'll die.
Yep, here we go again. But especially when there was 2, my god. But yeah. But again, it was just another interesting. It was almost like for me, it reminded me of like when Alan like absorbs the light somewhere and it slightly changes things. Whenever you would do that, like the kind of screen would start to like create static like on a TV, and then like something would slightly change. So like in the coffee world, in the amusement park, which by the way, one of the best sections of the game.
How has that not been done before? Like the idea of a coffee theme park.
I know, right? Where just you're up all the time, like very Silent Hill in that section, which is what I love. But again, there was a beautiful moment towards that where like you did something and then like all that change was just like suddenly a statue appeared of one of the characters, but like standing really weirdly, and like you went behind it and picked something up. And I love that where you don't know what to expect with these little nursery rhymes. Again, another little thing added in this game, didn't have to be there, but I love like kind of it ties into Saga thinking about her daughter the whole time. And then gives you these extra little parts.
Yeah, the thing with I'll look quickly because most of the best stuff to talk about is the narrative, the story, the characters, the wider framing, and what it means going forward, and how far Remedy have come as a creative.
Oh my god!
I do have a couple negatives in that regard, like the nursery rhyme thing, the way they introduce it, where it's like you get like a text sort of rhyme thing in the middle, like a clue, and then there's 5 spots around it to place dolls in.
Yeah,
you don't actually need to do all 5 spots, and a lot of them are quite like obtuse anyway. But that's what threw me off at the very beginning. I was like, oh, I'm not supposed to do this yet. The game will give me something later on. And obviously you find the dolls anyway. And so like that was a thing where I was collecting the dolls, but none of it seemed to ever line up with the nursery rhymes that I was finding. And then when you get the bolt cutters, you can explore that area again. And I remember just going back, just going like, well, I still don't have enough for all 5 for each thing. I don't have like water for where the wave is. I don't have a house doll or whatever it is. I don't have a thing for each one. And then you saying like, no, just try anyway. And then realizing like, oh, I do have enough to do them.
You just need 2.
Yeah, 2 or whatever. So some of them are only 1 for one of them. I think that could have been better explained on the for the gamer side, the user side. Some of the combat as well. Like I hated most of the combat. We should talk about that. It was just, to me, it's too like obtrusive for its own good, like especially because of the amount of damage the enemies do. The camera, I think, is way too tight on your shoulder when you're getting hit. The dodge is not reliable at all. It depends on the window when you hit it, but sometimes depending on the swing that they're doing, they'll just catch you anyway. Like you don't have an invulnerability hitbox when you hit dodge. You need to actually dodge out the specific way of the swing, which can be a good tactile thing. But when you're fighting in pitch black and the edge of the frame is red and the enemies are really blurry and they're zipping around you anyway, there were parts where I thought it just fell the F apart, like completely apart. And I was like, this is absolute S, to keep it very safe on the podcast side. But I was like, I hated some of that stuff. When the combat works, it's brilliant and it looks gorgeous. I think as well that it's impacted by the fact that they have patched the frame rate a couple times. But it's one of those games that looks so gorgeous, you want to keep it in quality mode. But then some of the harder boss fights, or most of the boss fights, or the group encounters do struggle with the frame rate. And then for me, you said you only died a couple times. I must have died like 20 times.
Okay.
Like I just died loads, just struggling to get a beat on what the hell was shooting me, or not knowing that a projectile was about to hit me from behind or whatever.
Yeah.
Like there was little things like that where I was like, it's not even legible what I'm supposed to do. It's too dark, it's whatever. So there were bits of that where I like hated most of the combat.
See, like for me, this is 2 things. So it's like the combat itself, and then there's combat encounters. So like the boss battles for me, like the very first one, I absolutely detested.
Yeah, the Nightingale fight.
Oh my god, awful. And the reason why was because like everything was blurry. Like obviously you just saw like all of the branches of the trees, like the grass and everything blowing everywhere. You had no clear indication of where he was, where you were. And then you'd randomly stumble upon boxes and you'd be like, I don't know where this is, but let's quickly grab some stuff because I'm nearly out of ammo. So like that was, I think that and another boss fight later on was like the time with Saga when I very nearly died, but somehow never did with
the
Saga.
One when you fight 2 people at once, at Ilmo and his brother Jaka, I think.
When
like,
you're just literally being shot.
Yeah.
I mean, you can kind of get behind a rock sometimes, but I think the main crux of, because they play very differently, like obviously Saga and Alan, they play differently. And like obviously with Saga, when you see a Taken, you shine the torch on straight away, you know who you're shooting. Once you've burnt the darkness off, shoot them down. With Alan, you've obviously got to second guess sometimes where you're looking at the shadows, you hear like, wake, and like stuff like that. And you're like, okay, like, is this the person? Sometimes you end up wasting your torch because it's not the right person. The trick there is to look at their hands, because if they're carrying a weapon, you know that they're going to be the correct one.
That's cool.
That is a little thing as well. And I love, like, going back to game design very briefly, when you're playing as Alan, the posters on the wall actually give you clues as well. When they'll say, like, have your torch here ready, and like stuff like that, which I absolutely love. Didn't need to be there, but just little details like that is what Remedy is known for. But with Alan, it does feel a lot more clunky for me. Which
I guess is intentional to a point.
Yeah, of course, to a point. But then as the player, obviously, you've got to be able to get into that and make that accessible for yourself to enjoy it as well, right? But my God, when it hits and when it really, really lands, I guess. For me, obviously, they're trying to recapture in the game design as well. And they've even said this, like Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 4, right? That kind of closer camera. It's more recognizable for people now. It's like more accessible when people see gameplay, trailers and things like that. They say, okay, I recognize that method of gameplay. I'm interested because I've played games of that caliber before. But Alan Wake 1, the camera angle for that me worked a lot better, where it was a lot more pulled back. It was still third person. And because there was so many enemies surrounding you, you could see them a lot better. You could actually land properly, like a flare shot and such like that. But it obviously does the Horizon Zero Dawn thing as well, where some of the enemies have like a red glowing part on them, and like, you know, if you hit that. But my God, when you hit that with a shotgun or with a rifle, you just feel the impact. I love how crunchy the shooting feels, like how the guns actually feel. But one thing I do like is how quick and how tense it is like you run out of ammo of like your handgun, you're like, right, quickly change to another weapon, popping off shots there. Right, I know this is going to take longer to reload, change to another weapon, quickly doing that. Oh my God, I need to reload everything now. Pop off a flare, put that on the ground, nothing can attack me, right, and let me choose a weapon, reload it back, right, let's go. And when you get into the rhythm of that and you understand that, it can take a few goes, obviously, depending on, are you being attacked by wolves? Are you being attacked by, 7 men at once? Once you get into the rhythm and routine of it, God, I love it. Like, I really love it.
That thing with the flare is hilarious, because I put a flare down to try exactly that, and I still got hit. And so at the beginning was like, oh, so they don't not attack you if you put the flare down. And so I was just like, I just felt effed for the most part when I was in those combat scenarios. But I think that was mainly because it was a ranged attack that still hit me. But sometimes you're just in the impact animation. I don't even know what's hitting me. It's pitch black. What's going on? And that stuff got really, really annoying. But like you said, when it works and you're able to chuck a flare down, you use a flashbang or you fire a flare gun into the middle of a group or whatever, and the bodies all go flying away. That was some of the coolest stuff about the original as well, especially with the slow-mo in the original. And like the slow-mo dodges and stuff. It has its moments, and I think when it works, it's great. But for me, when it falls apart, which I can't deny that almost every fight I had, I hated. Something went wrong. I got hit with something I couldn't see. It was just a blurry mess. But like you said, the satisfaction is there when you do connect with something. It doesn't get in the way too much, but it was just that thing where I was like, I kind of wish you guys didn't attempt boss fights, because the Nightingale one, like you said, kind of sucks, and the Ilmo one I didn't really enjoy. I had a stupid bug against Weaver as well. Is it Kathleen Weaver? I forget her full name, but the ghost woman, the old woman.
Yes, it's the granny.
And the old granny fight. And fighting her, she just glitched out where she was just floating above the water and wouldn't do anything. And so I was just like, I need to reload the save and then come back again.
I actually preferred the build up to her. So like when you had to go around and like turn on the lights again, like, and then you see her kind of like come out of the water and then go underneath, like that stuff's pure like Resident Evil, where it's like you can't see the creature under the water. And like the moments when I only ever saw her do it once, the music kind of builds up when she's getting closer. But one time I saw her like leap out the water and then leap back in right next to where I was, and I was like, whoa. So like that type of stuff, like I love when they build that. And obviously when it got into the boss fight, that for me, God, I hated that boss fight. It just felt like it went on and on and on. So when she went down, which the rifle is probably my favorite weapon with Saga. Like once I
wouldn't have that if you hadn't told me about it.
Yeah, exactly. You nearly missed it, but then I nearly missed the pump action shotgun, because you told me about that, which is wild to think to go into that last big. We have to probably talk about that last big fight as well. Like obviously the big, like when the music show happens, down by the water. That for me, because obviously that happens in the first game, right? And like I love that it's a direct callback to the first game. And it was tough, right? It was hard, but it's like multi-layered again, where you then got Scratch appears later on. You have to try and like turn the lights and trap him inside. And obviously you do like a turning
that turning thing. Oh my God.
Oh, honestly, like turn around. Like it just goes on forever. But you know what? I loved all of that. Like I love like you've got Casey obviously above, and then the other agent as well, like throwing ammo down, and like you've got the guys just rocking out playing the music. Like the atmosphere and the build there naturally feels like a natural end to the game after that. And then when you get the rest where it kind of staggers to the end for me, that's where I was like, oh, oh, okay, why is this game not over yet?
Yeah, that's exactly, because I played through the whole thing with my wife, and we thought the exact same thing.
Yeah.
I was like, big final fight. You've Saga's figured everything out, like in theory, like and using the clicker to bring Alan back and whatever. You've like roped in the gods of Asgard. They're doing their thing. You got the containment thing, and then when the thing with Scratch happens and it like the roof blows off, and then they elongate it by like another sort of hour or so.
Yeah.
With like Saga being in the dark place and then Saga figuring herself out and putting her mind back together. And
I did love that.
I like that as a specific little like sequence or whatever. Like I love the idea that you're playing. I like the idea of a controllable state of mental health ostensibly, and the idea of putting someone's focus, like ignoring the bad feelings, ignoring the illogical stuff, and putting yourself back together, knowing what you have control of. Like as someone who knows someone who went through a lot of mental health struggles, or multiple people, there's a lot of that is extremely important. And I think that actually might end up helping someone in general, which is obviously like a transcendent quality of that sequence, but it's phenomenally done. And so I love all that stuff. But like you said, pacing wise, it's like the story wraps. You've had the third act finale is done, and then we're in the epilogue, we're in the end game bit, which is fine. But like that very last bit, I wonder development wise if that was what they tagged on when they knew they were going to do Control 2 and Alan Wake 3.
Right.
Because it is the stuff that directly leads into the next game. And then you get the tease of, it's not a loop, it's a spiral and whatever. But all that stuff, everything feels purposeful. I love that the game exists overall. I love that it feels like Remedy didn't hold anything back. I think it's like a shining star, especially this year, with many months of constant layoffs and all the live service conversations that are happening, and no one seems to know what the hell they're doing at the upper echelon of gaming. I love Remedy building their own engine for the future and just executing on a vision. Like, it's rare that you see it, and the fact that it's now nominated for everything is awesome. Let's talk about Mr. Door and some of the wider fiction stuff, all the wider lore stuff, because you say you didn't play Quantum Break, but one thing that's blowing the minds of the Remedy fandom at the minute is that Mr. Door, his name is Warland Door. That's pretty much a mirror for Martin Hatch. Martin Hatch was Lance Reddick's character in Quantum Break.
Right.
And so another thing to bring in is Dylan in Control talks about meeting Mr. Door, which I forgot that he mentioned that.
Right.
But the clip's doing the rounds online and stuff. But there's a sequence where you play as Jesse, you talk to Dylan, and he talks about when he was in like the dark place or the hiss or whatever, Control's version of the other place, the astral plane. He met a person called Mr. Door who told him there were infinite realities and infinite, multiverses or whatever, all on top of each other, all next to each other.
I love that.
And Dylan says that Mr. Door told him that in one reality there was a cop, in the other reality there was a writer who wrote the cop, but in the first one the cop was real. And I was like, well, that kind of works as their explainer for Max Payne and Casey.
Love that.
And so like that's kind of a way of bringing that together. But Mr. Door, which is such a stupid name, seems like he's the ultimate arbiter of everything. And I wonder a few years ago in 2019 if they were planning on using Lance Reddick as the ultimate dude. And obviously sadly like Reddick's passed away, but like in theory they're now going to be giving it to David Harewood, which is cool. I love all the sequences with him. I thought there'd be more of him in the game anyway.
Yeah, same. Like, and I have to say, like, Jason Strider, like, actually confirmed on like his podcast that character was supposed to be Lance Reddick. So like he contacted a contact that he has in Remedy, and he got back to him and said, yes, I can confirm that was supposed to be Lance Reddick.
Oh, sweet. Okay, that does bring it together.
And don't get me wrong, like, Mr. Door was incredibly well performed, obviously, in the character. I really did think I wanted to get more of him. I really, really did. Like, I really liked the sequence, like the talk show, like when they first came out, kind of reminded me a little bit of like that scene from Joker when Joker's like on the talk show.
Yeah,
like
same framing.
It gave me very much those vibes of like, bringing somebody on to almost make a joke out of them, really. And it was very, very similar in that time of framing context. But I love that it almost kind of plays into your worst fears of like, when you have nightmares and when you go on stage and it's like, you don't know your lines, but go out there. Right. It's like, it kind of felt like that with Alan, where like, when he's first in there, he's behind the curtain. It's like, here's Alan Wake, go out. And it's like, let's talk about this book that you haven't written. And he's like, wait, what? I haven't written that.
Yeah.
And I love that. It's kind of, as you said, the arbiter. It's him kind of saying, well, of course you have. Alan.
You're going to need to do this to get out. Yeah.
Are you playing this character right now? Are you still in your writing mode? Are you playing these characters and almost kind of belittling him in a way? And obviously he's absolutely in the dance sequence as well, which like honestly has my heart, body, and soul. That whole dance routine.
Well, they finally put the songs on Spotify now as well.
And I have to say as well, like the music in this is phenomenal. Like the song "Wide Awake" is like on my playlist. I adore that. But
we should touch on that super quick. Is just the amount of different mediums they've rolled together. They've filmed so many custom. There's a whole custom movie in here. There's Thomas Zane's movie.
15 minutes of it.
Yeah, and like there's like the TV shows that all the songs are custom made for the game. Like they've talked over the years. Sam Lake's talked quite a lot about wanting to explore different mediums, then bring it all together for a game. This is, including all that, their most complete work. Like every single bit of this is custom. Like and that's an incredible feat as well.
Yeah, honestly, like Sam Lake for me, it kind of reminds me of Kojima in a way that that, you know, he sees like a wider kind of context of like everything that's available to him in terms of like music, which Kojima's massive on within his games.
True.
And then like the acting as well. I mean, let's talk about those like cutscenes, you know, in Metal Gear Solid 4, hello. But
Yes.
like, and we get like a little bit of that in this game as well, because obviously you can tell, like, as you say, we've got Night Springs, we've got this acted show, we've got the film that runs for 15 minutes. We've then got this TV show, which is coming out as well, which would be interesting to see how much of that we get with like Sam Lake's involvement there as well. But I just think, for me, Sam Lake and people like Kojima, like, you know, people can love it, people can hate it, but I just think it's genius how like, to take your idea and really kind of incorporate different mediums into it in terms of how can this music fit into what I'm trying to say? How can like this little film like expand on this part of the story that I really want to tell without making players necessarily have to play that? It's kind of there if you want to dive into it. And obviously like Alan Wake's writing a novel, he's got several novels, so it kind of makes sense in terms of building out a big narrative as well and incorporating that into the world. Every time a chapter ends and a music, like a song plays, it's referential to what you've just played and also hinting towards what's coming next. And to do something like that, for me, that's I know people like laugh and scoff when they say, oh, video games are art, blah, 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 blah. But for me, this is genuine art. This is taking the artistry of not just what Sam Lake's done and what the creators have done, but other artists as well.
Yeah.
Bringing them into the world that he's created. And it makes sense and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I've always been a big proponent of the game. Like, I remember back when Roger Ebert first said that, it was like, video games can never be art because the experience is authored by the player. And it was like, yeah, within confines designed by the creators, by the art departments, by the coders, etc. It was always art. But yeah, like that, I wrote a whole dissertation on that thing back in the day.
Just read it now.
It's like, hey, if you want 10,000 words. But no, I always loved that. And it's one of those things where like 10 years ago, you know, you advance 10 years later and look at what we're making now. And like this, like I said before, is like one of the bastions of what the industry can be. And especially compared to, you know, the likes of like Redfall or the latest Call of Duty or whatever, like there's such a girth of pure raw quality in what is inside Alan Wake 2. And like, yeah, like for me, there are some rough edges with the combat, but there's so much that they absolutely nail and just like, and set a new bar for, in terms of, like you said, performance capture or the realization of the concept and everything else. What do you think of all the Remedy shared universe stuff? I keep forgetting what they refer to it as. I think it's the Remedy connected universe.
I think so, yeah. But
like the RCU or whatever the hell it's going to be. Like they seem to be having this thing going forward, and we got it in Control where they united Jesse with Alan. But going forward, it seems like you know, Sam Lake has said he's very excited about it. There was an interview with the BAFTAs where he said this is what we're doing going forward, and they're working on Control 2. They recently did a financial statement thing where they confirmed Control 2, and so it seems like going forward that's the thing that they're doing. Lots of overlappy stuff. Pardon the pun, with character overlaps. Do you want that, or do you want more isolated stories? What do you think?
I absolutely love it, and I'm all in. Like, I adore it. So, like, I love that in the sense that all of these games, in a way, because there's an element of weirdness to like Remedy, right? Like, and I don't say that in a negative way. I love it, like, because it's so.
They're video games David Lynch now.
Absolutely, very much that vibe. It's so different from like the kind of the mainstream of what we're getting right now. And like, you know, I'll briefly come back to that, but like, I love the fact that Sam Lake and the team got to make this game, and that really outpours when you see like when he's tweeting saying, "Oh my God, thank you so much for everyone who's played the game," and the reviews like reflect that. We're getting. The reason that Alan Wake exists is obviously there's been so much outcry for 13 years, for God's sake. But as well, like the fact that it exists and the way that it does, they were allowed to just go off and just make their own thing. For me, genuinely, like hats off to them as well as a company to be able to do that. Genuinely, like my heart goes out to them. I'm over the moon for them. But the connected universe, I adore. And I know, like, you know, we're in this world now of like media where we get like the MCU where everything's connected, blah, 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 blah. But what I like about this is like, this playground that they've created for themselves, and like when they are bringing new things in, it weaves in perfectly. Whereas, you know, with stuff like the MCU, it kind of feels like we're doing this film, then we have to kind of try and loosely tie it into this thing somehow, and it always kind of feels really jarring. But because like Sam and obviously the team have really got Sam, I'm calling him by first name basis, me and Big Sam. They've obviously got this playground that they've really woven, really thought about, and like everything makes sense within that playground, right? So like when I was playing Control, and I found that little kind of article that was talking about when like Jessie and her brother found the projector and ended up like being projected into Bright Falls. And then like like obviously they heard that song, and then when they came back and she talked to a therapist and she was like, that song doesn't exist. What are you talking about? And it was because it was from the world of Alan Wake. It's little moments like this, little seeds that are being sown, which then build into bigger things. So like the moment the moment in Alan Wake 2 when like, you know, like Alan, I mean, I love that section when like Alan's sitting at the table with Casey, suddenly gunfire happens. happens. And like, it's very cinematic, right? Casey runs out, like you've obviously wake up, there's bodies everywhere. You then run after Casey, you find the double barrel shotgun for like 10 seconds. And then you see him in the distance, you collapse. Saga runs in, he's about to get stabbed. She runs the member of, like, shoots the member of the cult of the tree. And then obviously the FBC then land the helicopter and like, right, we're taking over here.
Yes.
Like that for me just feels like it's so earned.
Yeah.
Like, because you've played all of Control before that. And even if you haven't, like, even if you go in, you know, kind of, okay, the FBC, they're a big thing because they're littered through this game so much. But I just love it. Like, I love that it doesn't feel jarring. It weaves into the narrative. If you play Control, you get a better understanding of that. Obviously, I haven't played Quantum Break, but going into this, apparently, so I hear. And then the rights issue for that is apparently a weird thing as well going forward, which is why they couldn't directly kind of make full reference to that. But even that little tie-in that you said there, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Because like, if it honors, like, if you've played that game, then they're kind of winking at you to say, hey, remember this? Well, hello, like, we're referencing this. But even if you haven't, like, obviously I haven't missed out on that, but it's just, it works for me on such a granular level, and everything that's woven into place, it just weaves together perfectly. It's not jarring. They're not doing it for the sake of it. They've really worked on this whole thing to pull it together. I'm fully in, man.
I love, like, because there's bits and pieces, like, I'm curious to see how it goes. Like, I definitely have superhero fatigue. I massively have multiverse fatigue.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, as a narrative device, it depends what you do with it. Like, there's such a girth and quality or purpose between using a multiverse idea in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, when they don't do anything with that, that idea of it, versus Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is all about the idea of, you know, if you could talk to the other versions of yourself that took different paths, what could you then learn from that, and the different pitfalls that come from that. I think there is merit in a multiversal framing device, narrative framing device, or storytelling device, but so few people do it well. And I think because of the Disneyfication of that term, it's super easy to just use multiverse as like, oh, that character died, there's another one over here. It's the same person, they step back in, whatever. Even Mortal Kombat's done it with some of the characters in there. And so it depends how they do it going forward, and how true all that Mr. Door, Walden Door, Martin Hatch stuff is anyway. I guess Dylan's talking about it in Control.
Yeah.
But it is interesting using the FBC as like this universe's Men in Black, and they sort of just drop in, they take care of scenarios. I love when Estevez is saying, you know, we have all this equipment built for this stuff. I thought she was going to give you like a laser gun, like a light laser gun, and at the end you'd just be blasting Taken with it, which you kind of are with like some of the big spotlights. But I love the idea of this like super secret agency that know this stuff, and then they also get it in over their head as the story kind of goes on. But I think there's so much more they can do there. And like you said, when they literally when they drop in that specific scene, that was probably the height of the whole, other than the dance sequence, the height of the game for me, because I was like, oh, we're on now. And I just want to play as Alan, and I want to do that stuff. And I guess, to wrap it back around to the stuff that I wanted more of, it would have been more of that. I wanted more of the conversations between Agent Estevez or other FBC people and Wake. I want to know what they're asking him. I want to know what he's talking about. Because by the time you get there as Saga, or even as Alan's side of it, it's already gone to hell anyway.
Yeah, that was a big thing for me. Like when Alan was obviously like airlifted away to like, they took him away, and then you obviously played as Saga at that point. I really thought, when we take back over as Alan, are we going to be in the FBC headquarters? Like when he's
that's what I thought it would be.
Yeah, and I was like, oh my God, like if Jesse Faden comes in and sits down at the table and interviews him, I will literally collapse.
And like Casper Darling and everything. Like there's one bit when you're in the Ocean View Hotel as Alan where you see a TV flicker to life and Casper Darling's looking through the lens. And I was like, oh, so over the last 13 years, he's also been trying to reach Wake.
Yeah.
But they don't do much with that.
But then again, we've got the DLC coming out as well, so who knows, like they might lean more into that.
Definitely a tease for it.
What's happening at the lake house? Like, is Jesse chilling there on holiday? Like, if it hasn't become aware yet, I really want to see
with a parasol and a cup of coffee.
Can you imagine that's just like, oh, hey, what are you guys doing here? Like a little umbrella behind her ear.
I would take that.
Oh, I would absolutely be fully in. But yeah, like, that for me was one of the absolute high points of the game. God, I love that. The whole build up to it as well. Like when you kind of play as Alan plays, and I will admit, like, the latter part of the game as well, like I did like that briefly we did get to go into each other's worlds. Like I really did like that when you saw Saga like in the New York section, obviously Alan as well there in like the kind of running through the Bright Falls section at the end as well. Like I really did actually appreciate that, but it didn't lead to much.
No.
But obviously, we get the ending of that ending where, as we said, Saga's on the phone and then Alan's shot in the head and then suddenly sits back up, which is a nice kind of reference point because we do see like the glowing kind of hole in his head and we get the explanation as to why.
That is the opening shot, yeah.
Literally is.
Which I forgot because I've restarted it and I'm going through Control again now as well.
Oh, nice.
Which is weird because Control totally works as a sequel to this. Like if you come out of it going like, I just want to know more FBC stuff or I want to be in that aura again.
Yeah.
Control totally works. But yeah, the opening shot is of him being shot.
It's that. And I do love how directly, like, and obviously we had the, altered world events, Alan Wake expansion, let's be real, that's what it meant the whole time. But I love that with the Control DLC. I know that you haven't played it, and obviously when you do go around playing it this time, I think I already told you about the character from Alan Wake 1 that's in that. If you've forgotten, that's fine.
I might have forgotten.
I won't say anything more. But even just like the moments of when in Control, obviously, I mean, the gameplay in Control for me is probably the best that Remedy's done since Max Payne. Like, it's so
funny,
tight.
Yeah, it's funny going back to it after playing Alan Wake 2, because Alan Wake 2 is so kind of led in, like, intentionally, and it's more like a Resident Evil 2. And then when you go back to Control, it's so much more like twitchier and responsive, which is good. It lets you, like, on the fly grab bits of cement and throw them at people, but it is way snappier than Alan Wake 2.
When you play that DLC as well, obviously, because the darkness comes in like pretty much immediately. And when you're picking up literally lights with Jesse and shining it on the darkness to burn it away, it's like taking everything that you love like about Alan Wake, but just doing it in a controlled way. And especially as that game goes on, man, the way they introduce light and darkness in that DLC, and then the way the DLC ends directly references Alan Wake 2 in such a cool way. Yeah. So yeah, to go back and play Control probably give you like a better understanding of the FBC as well, like going into Alan Wake 2 and what their deal is, and God, where Jesse is.
I love that they're both companion pieces. Like, it's like I said, there's an overall feeling of authorship and confidence from Remedy that they've never had before. They have, but it wasn't on this scale. Like when they were doing Max Payne and then Max Payne 2, that was all they were kind of known for. And they always had so much character in those games. I'm replaying Max Payne 2 at the minute as well. I would have been in such a Remedy hole for the last since Alan Wake 2 came out. I was like, I just need as much Remedy stuff as possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're on the form of their lives at the minute, and it's great seeing them execute on all these different things. Let's talk about what's next, because they do leave it on a cliffhanger. You get there, it's not a loop, it's a spiral. There's the sort of weird like final twist with Alice, where like she faked her own death to make everything. I was a bit lost with what wrinkle that was supposed to give me on the previous events, because the whole time that Alan's in the dark place writing these various stories to get out, he thinks that Alice is still down there with him, and he's the graffiti says that around the environment, like save Alice, and Alice is trapped and whatever. And then she reveals that actually no, she faked her own death, and she's got the leather jacket on at the end, and she's going to go back into the dark place to get him out. What did you think of all the Alice stuff? I was kind of lost on what that was supposed to mean, where like how it was. If any part of him can see into the real world, which we kind of think he can because he used the real Alex Casey, then surely he would have known that she was there. Like I'm getting, like I said, in my brain when I try and figure it out, I'm like, is he just a big floating CCTV camera sometimes? Because in Control, they talk about any para-utilitarian will develop clairvoyance. So like assumedly that's what he has. That's how he's able to write these stories and stuff. But yeah, I was like, wouldn't you know that she was alive over 13 years? When in 13 years time did she kill herself? Or fake kill herself? That was like a whole thing where I was like, I can't factor this twist into everything else that I know just so far, and then what that means going forward, other than the idea of she's going to try and save him going forward. Yeah,
like for me, I wasn't a big fan of it. So like initially when you get told like, obviously you find out like, oh, she's killed herself. And I was like, Alan sacrifices himself in the first game for her to then end her life. Like it took away so much from that. And obviously we get the fake out when, that wasn't real. It was just, making sure that Alan knew that, or Mr. Scratch knew that, so that she could go back in and save Alan. Yeah. It's like, who was that for?
I took, just super quick, I took her killing herself when we thought that's what she had done as a direct response to how much Scratch was torturing her. And she was tortured by the memory of the dude that she used to be in love with, because he apparently would come to the house every night or whatever. So I think like that's what I took that to be. But then, like I said, she fakes it anyway, so it's like whatever.
And I don't know, there's a few things like if Alan is still under the impression that he's trying to save Alice, then when you've got two FBI agents that are there immediately, are you not asking them as the first thing straight away, can you go and check on my wife and see how she's doing? Like, what's going on there? Because if there's any two people you're going to ask to do that, it's going to be two FBI agents that are right there in front of you. I get obviously his mind's jumbled and the fact that, he's part in the dark place. Obviously Scratch has taken over his body as well, which is so cool, by the way. I love when that first happens and you're like, oh my God.
When he gets the leather jacket on.
Yeah. And like, S is getting real.
It is.
And I love that section when you first take him on with Saga and you're like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
But in like the prison, that was really, really cool. But yeah, like I don't think they made enough of it. So like I think if it is going to be something that really, if we explore this in some of the DLC, which I'm guessing we will do, because obviously if Alice is going back in to save Alan, that's quite a big thing.
I think that's their Alan Wake 3 plan, personally.
Yeah, 100%. I know that she was always kind of there as the character in the first Alan Wake, and like she was there and then obviously disappeared into the lake and you had to save her, and she was like kind of the main reason why Alan was going through a lot of this was to get her back. But yeah, I think they could have made a lot more of that, if I'm honest. Like going through the kind of the apartment and seeing the videos and everything, I was a bit like, okay, what are we doing here? Like,
I think it's a weird, that's one of those things that I guess I would class as like a mild negative or whatever, is like some of the level design stuff or the pacing stuff where it's like, okay, like as Alan, it's like go to Parliament Tower, okay, go to Ocean View Hotel. No, actually I need to go back to Parliament Tower again. And then you leave and do another thing. Then it's okay, I need to go back to Parliament Tower again because that's where Scratch is going to be. And it was just like, this is kind of just going on. And like that paired with like some of the ways that they gate you from getting forward, where it's like, go find the key. Oh, actually the power's out, go get a fuse. And like, you can say it's survival horror 101, but it's 90s survival horror 101, and we've kind of got past that. Like Resident Evil 2, the new one doesn't rely on that anywhere near as much as it used to.
Yeah.
And so like little things like that where I was like, this is meandering to a fault almost, but they pull it back before it gets like truly tedious.
Yeah.
But there are little things like that where it's like you're trying to set up this other game. That's why I mentioned the development reality of it before, because I was like, when did they know what they were going to do next? And Sam Lake has said that Alan Wake is his favorite character. So it's like, I mean, he clearly resembles him and everything. Yeah, like in terms of the creator and how we're making a whole world and everything. And so, for me, it was an interesting thing to leave off on. I wonder if we'll get like an Alice chapter as part of the Night Springs DLC, maybe?
I really hope so, because we are focusing on many different characters in that as well, aren't we? So it'll be interesting, like, how much time we spend with whichever characters we play as. Like, it'll be really interesting to see where we lean in there. Will we play as, like, Thor and Odin as well? Like, will we play as, like, interesting, like, if Rose has a random chapter, like, that would be really interesting as her, like, this fangirl who believes Alan is talking to her, which really scratched the whole time. It'll be really interesting to see where we lean in there, and then, again, how that ties into, like, the lake house as well, where we go with that. Like, will we see Alice in that darkness as well? Like,
I'll tell you what as well, is, like, we mentioned, I don't know, 20 hours ago when we started this podcast, about the idea of, like, playing this one first. And I've had, like, a few people tweet me and be like, oh, can I start Alan Wake 2? Should I just jump in? Yeah. And I don't think so. I was so lost, and I have played these games, that, like, I would say you should have pretty good knowledge of Alan Wake 1 and the DLC and Control to stand a chance at figuring this stuff out.
Agreed.
If you want to. I think, like, there's, like I said, some people love the feeling of being kind of confused by stimuli, like what Lynch gives you. And it's like, that's fine. That's not how I'm wired. I want to be able to ground it and make sense of it, or at least establish a context. And so, like, the amount of things they throw at you here towards the end just started throwing me off, mostly the Alice stuff, and like things towards the end game. But yeah, that idea of, like, they pull so much from like the Scratch stuff, to me only makes sense if you played Alan Wake's American Nightmare, or you looked up the recap for it. And that's the main antagonist for the most part. And it's a bit like, if someone was brand new and all you had to go off was Alan Wake 2's descriptions of Scratch, I don't even think you would get what the hell it is.
No.
Or he is.
No.
So I kind of think that it's weird, because that makes it a perfect sequel. It's fundamentally a sequel. You need the original one to go there. And I do like when works of art do that. Or games do that. But what do you think of that stuff? Like, I guess the way that Scratch is kind of handled in terms of, like, an antagonist or whatever.
You know what? I like that he came in when he came in, and he wasn't, like, there from day dot. Like, I love that they built up to that. So, of course, like, you know, if you have played Alan Wake's American Nightmare, you kind of know that he's going to make an appearance, right? And the kind of, I guess there'll be, like, little references littered through the game as well, until obviously you get his big reveal as well. But I loved it, because I love, like, you know, straight away, like, you got these guys in prison, right? Like, who are telling you, look, like, the reason why we want to kill Alan is because of this guy. And you're like, whoa, like, what are you talking about? Yes. And then just that switch in the prison cell, and obviously just obliterates one of the guys immediately, breaks out, and then, like, you know, you're thrown literally out of the back door, and then this boss battle fights. And, like, it's this whole time, it's like tearing down expectations, right? Of, like, you're there to save Alan, like, you're finding out where this man has gone, and then for this man to suddenly have a pipe in his hand, a leather jacket, looking pretty smoking hot, and then
I love evil Alan's look. It's great.
God. It's like the tilted head down, just staring at you, like, and like the hair billowing and everything. It's just incredible. Like, I really loved how they handled him. Really, really enjoyed the boss fights with him. I love that we get it again, obviously, the big fight on the beach as well. And because you've already had that fight, you kind of know what you're doing. You're like, right, retreading similar territory here. The only difference is, again, turning those lights at the speed of, like, you know, nothing, and then getting him in the cage. But I really, really liked it. I thought it was really, really well handled.
Yeah, for me, I wanted just a bit more on what he was.
Yes.
Like, I never played American Nightmare, so it was just one of those things where I ended up with loads of stuff at the beginning of Alan Wake 2. I was like, I need to refresh my mind on what, because I played Alan Wake 1 in Control, and, like, read quite a lot of the things that you could find around the environment in Control, but I was still, like, I felt like it was playing with a certain level of assumed knowledge that I clearly just didn't have on tap. So I was like, I need to go watch some recaps and stuff. And then it was like, after doing American Nightmare, Nightmare and watching all of Alan Wake 1 and Control stuff, and then all the stuff with Thomas Zane, all of that stuff was like, I feel like that's fundamental to even like to get Alan Wake 2, at least in a satisfying way for me, where like, you have characters referring to Alan in this one as Tom. Artie keeps calling him Tom, and it's like, if you know enough about the lore, that's because of Thomas Zane from like decades ago and whatever. But I think it's super easy to just be like, what? Like, who's that? What's going on?
It's kind of like what I said earlier on, where like you can get as much or as little out of this game as you want, and like none of it feels like, I kind of like mentioned the MCU like earlier, but it's like similar where like, you might go in to see a new film, and it's like, oh, if you haven't watched the TV show, then you don't know about this character. But it's not like that for me, because like that's just like a character moment which kind of is a bit jarring.
Right.
Whereas when this, it's like more context based. So like you'll understand more of the context and more like thematically of what this character actually means if you go back and play it. Plus, we're talking about solid gameplay experiences. Like, we're not telling you to go back and watch a terrible show to get to know a character. It's like, go back and play this awesome game to further understand like how much this character means. But again, like someone like Scratch, like if you go into Alan Wake 2, you haven't played a single other Remedy game, he's a pretty cool boss.
He's cool. Like, he looks awesome, and the fights look really cool. I mean, that's the thing I like, and I guess that'll be something that just each person can decide how much they agree with it. Is like, do you want your sequels to be a fundamental continuation of what went before, or do you want them to be an onboarding point? Yeah. And it's like in gaming, there's been so many examples where that was handled wrongly. Like I remember EA saying that Mass Effect 3 was the perfect place to start, and it was like, no, it isn't. It's number 3. And I never I'm not someone who will watch number 2 of a series if I haven't seen 1. Yeah. And to me, that's at least my view on what a sequel is, literally, in terms of like what purpose it serves. Yeah. But yeah, so it's one of those things where in this regard, like it is a fundamental continuation of at least Alan Wake 1, comprising the DLC. Like it's not that American Nightmare stuff isn't optional. Yeah. But I like that from Remedy's point of view of saying like, no, all of this stuff matters. Like we're only doubling down on the fact that we did all this for a reason. Because it took them so long to get the rights back for Alan Wake anyway, like 8 years or 9 years.
Yeah, Jesus.
So it's like, it is, I think, overall, as we like wind down for now, we know to talk about it later. I do think Alan Wake 2 is like maybe the single greatest achievement of the year, right next to Baldur's Gate 3. Just in terms of what it means for the studio, and just how far they've come. Like going back through Max Payne 2 and finding the cleaner who's singing Late Goodbye by Poets of the Fall, which is the thing that made them one of my favorite bands. And then jumping 20 years forward and being like, okay, now they're doing this big song and dance number, and they actually play like pretty much main characters in the lore. Yeah. But Poets of the Fall themselves are also in the game, which is crazy. They're on the radio. You can listen to Poet songs as well as Old Gods of Asgard songs. All of that combined with the musical stuff, the movie stuff, and everything else, it's a hell of a achievement. Like it's just, you were saying before about it, you're just so happy for them and same. Yeah. Like I think you mentioned Kojima before. Sam Lake is the guy. Yeah. Like Kojima was the guy for a while, but I think it's Sam Lake and it's Remedy overall. Like no one is executing on a vision anywhere close to what they've pulled off with this.
It's such a labor of love, and I think honestly, I think it's so respectful as well to the fan base in terms of like obviously they fought to get the rights back to Alan Wake because remember like it was in the news like a couple of years back when they were like, oh, we had this artwork, we had these ideas for Alan Wake 2, we couldn't pull them off because now we're in this obviously legal battle where we can't get the rights back. And then when they got them back, it's so respectful and so wonderful what they've done. Like it's really honestly like walking back into Bright Falls for the first time, like honestly I was giddy. Yeah. Like just as a fan of like everything that Sam Lake like puts his hands to, honestly it felt so respectful of like just this HD uplift. It looked beautiful. I mean there's parts of this game which look unbelievably stunning. Like the light work, like everything, it looks beautiful. But as well, like, obviously for me, and you tweeted about this and I said something similar where Baldur's Gate for me is the obvious choice of game of the year. Obvious. I mean, the things that Baldur's Gate does is just phenomenal. Like for me, and what that game means to the industry genuinely is amazing and it deserves it, rightfully so. But my heart goes with Alan Wake on the basis of some of the best moments I've ever had in video games, like going back all the way through the years, is in Alan Wake 2. I've never felt in such a long time a game draw me in. And I know when I'm enjoying a game so much because literally, there's been a lot of good games come out this year and I kind of flitted between them. Right. Some of them I've got to go back to. But this game from start to finish, I was like, I cannot wait to get back into this world because it just absorbed me in, like in the way that Alan's absorbed in, like the way Saga gets absorbed in. But it's honestly, it's beautifully done, so well handled by a company who clearly respect gamers in the way that they are designing games, that they know that you will get enjoyment out of this if you love their work.
Yeah, but also not curtailing to that or pandering to it or whatever. They're not going like, okay, what should we do next, guys? You know, it's not it's the polar opposite of a Suicide Squad situation. It is very much, you know, it's still like a Remedy side. It's authored, it's intentional, it's confident, it's passionate. Like it's everything that people want to see from the gaming industry.
Yes.
And I think so far that has been reflected in the sales, and I'm so glad it's reflected in the awards nominations so far. But we'll see how the Video Game Awards shake out in December. But yeah, for now, this has been the What Culture Gaming Podcast. I've been your host, Scott Tilford, joined by Adam Strawn.
Goodbye, everyone.
And we'll end the podcast. Bye.